Hello everybody. Today we are back with another Borderlands 2 tier list video, and today we are going to be ranking the unique pistols with a couple non-uniques thrown in, but we are basically just going to be looking at the unique pistols and a few other solid ones. Um, so, been pretty busy lately with work and just kind of settling into a new schedule, so I haven't been uploading as frequently. Um, Hopefully going to get on a better schedule over time, but I'm definitely not completely abandoning the channel or anything, so I appreciate your patience and all the support I've been getting, even without uploading super frequently. But I just wanted to let you guys know I will still be around. I'm not abandoning the channel. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started. First, we have the Anarchist, which is a non-unique pistol. Doesn't have a special name or red text. It's just a purple Vladoff pistol, but I included it because it's actually really good. Has a very high fire rate, very high magazine size, DPS is really high. Really the biggest downside with the Anarchist is the ammo consumption. Excuse me. However, the DPS really helps make up for that. It is ammo hungry, but it can put out really good DPS. It's good from medium to short range. Even it's really not even that bad from long range. It's a fairly accurate pistol, and it just puts out a lot of damage. I like this pistol a lot, and I'm pretty comfortable putting it in A tier. We'll see if it stays high A tier or not, but definitely A tier for now. Okay. Next up, we have the Dominator, which is a unique E-Tech pistol. Always corrosive, it fires slow-moving homing projectiles. Upon impact, projectiles stick to the enemy or the surface briefly before exploding, dealing corrosive damage in a small area. Projectile bounces if they hit an inert surface. Um, this weapon, frankly, is pretty shit. E-Tech pistols are really not that good to begin with, and the damage on this one is delayed because of the way the projectiles work. You also cannot get critical hits with this weapon, and it is limited to corrosive damage. This weapon is really bad. It is very slow. The delayed aspect of the damage makes its DPS even lower. This is just a really, really poor pistol. Generally speaking, E-Tech pistols are bottom tier, like really, really bad. The darts and spiker pistols, whatever, are just super trash, and this is no exception. Not a good weapon. Okay, next up we have the Devastator. So this is a Seraph pistol. It always fires 2 shots, explosive, um, pretty inaccurate, small magazine size, and slow projectiles. Um, and this weapon is even worse when you consider that the Herald exists. Not great. Honestly, I think most people probably don't even know this pistol exists. It's pretty underwhelming, and it really pales in comparison to the Herald, and honestly, it pales in comparison to like even just like a normal explosive pistol. It's just like really, really underwhelming. The slow mag size and the slow moving projectiles really, really hurt this weapon. Um, I don't think it really has much of a niche. It's pretty damn weak. I'd be pretty comfortable putting it in the, I guess D. It might go down to F though, like depending on how this list plays out. I guess you could make it work better than the Dominator, but they're both bad. All right, next up we have Fibber. And this pistol has like different barrels, and which determines how it works. There's like a shotgun barrel for the Fibber, which can actually be pretty good. And it functions more like a shotgun. Use it from close range, and then it also has the ricochet barrel Fibber, and I think there's some other barrels, but those are the two common ones. Um, the ricochet barrel Fibber is a really, really strong variant, and it's especially good on gauge. Like it's amazing on gauge. Um, but it's also surprisingly pretty solid and strong on other characters as well, whether you're doing the ricochet or the shotgun barrel. Um, Honestly, I think Gage boosts the Fibber up a tier on her own because of how good it is on her. Um, it's easily S tier on Gage, but it's also still really solid on other characters. So I think I'm comfortable putting it. Really, you could make an argument, I think, anywhere between B and S tier. Obviously, for Gage, it's an S tier. On other characters, it's solid, but it's nowhere near as good as it is on Gage. I think I think low A tier is pretty fair, but we may change that. I think in that territory is reasonable. But moving on, we'll go ahead and do the Greed, which is a Jacob's Elemental pistol that is always fire. No movement speed penalty when aiming down sight. It's not the most potent weapon, but it is a decent Jacob's pistol. It can be pretty solid with Zero, who can buff the crit damage of the weapon pretty significantly, along with the fire rate, which really helps this weapon succeed. Um, Honestly, this weapon is nothing special, but it's not trash either, which I think firmly puts it in the C tier for me. Like, it's definitely usable, but it's really not going to blow you away. Moving on, we'll do the Croc Nozzle. This is going to be a difficult one to rate. Um, I think obviously most people are aware of the insane healing that the Grog Nozzle gives, and for that reason alone, the utility it provides for any build is really, really high because the survivability you get from this weapon is unparalleled, and is also a great slag weapon, but the damage is obviously horrific. Um, this one almost doesn't even seem fair to rate because it's just so different, like the way that it's used. Um, yeah, this is kind of tough. I think we'll just put it in S tier. That feels wrong, but I mean, it's just so damn good at what it does, and it's practically essential for raid bosses. Melee Zero is really needed. It's so good for health gating. It's a really good slag weapon. Don't get me wrong, this if you're actually using this weapon to like deal damage or just kind of generally use it, it's terrible, but I think the utility that this weapon brings is completely unmatched. Even though I don't like it myself, I'll still give it an S tier rating. Moving on, we have the Gub, which is a bandit pistol with nice fire rate and a massive mag size, only corrosive. It's actually not really as bad as you might think. I think this weapon is kind of seen as like a meme weapon or like kind of a joke weapon, but it's actually really solid with most characters. I think it's especially good with Zero, but any character with reload speed and fire rate buffs can really like turn this thing up to a new level. It's a fun weapon, and it's certainly pretty viable even on OP10. Um, I think I'd be pretty comfortable putting this in the B or A tier. I think the Fibber is slightly better because it has a higher ceiling potential than the Gub. The Gub is just solid. I think I'll put Gub in B tier, actually, like high B. It's a very solid pistol. It's just not gonna like really blow you away, whereas the Fibber has the potential to be a game changer. Okay, the Gunnerang, another difficult pistol to rank. It's a TDR chucking pistol that is primarily used for raiding with its weird boomerang mechanic. When you throw it, it will come back to you. Um, it can be absolutely insane with Axton and Krieg. They can both use this for raiding and or just ridiculously high damage. This helps with the rating of the weapon or the ranking, but it's not very practical to use at all. It's extremely ammo inefficient if you're chucking it like that outside of a raiding situation. And it really needs like a pre-setup, like using like you can't just like run around and throw this thing. You'll probably miss a lot. It's primarily um, useful for its rating capabilities, and it's simply not that easy to do it. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think we'll put it in the B tier just because it does have the potential to be an amazing raiding weapon that can just tear shit up with Axton or Krieg, but like generally speaking, it's not that good. But we'll give it a slight boost because it can at least it has a higher ceiling than uh, the Greed down here at least. Like it can do something special for you, which I think at least makes it an interesting option. But generally speaking, it is super niche. Okay, next up we have Gwen's Head, which is an easy to obtain pistol, increased crit damage, 7-round burst, all elements, super easy to find and very solid. I think it's outclassed by a lot of the pistols on this list, but it's very accessible and it's very solid. Like it's just easy to get, and it's going to give you some decent damage even on OP10. It's not going to blow you away, but it can get the job done. Essentially, I would classify it as a nothing special but serviceable gun. which I think would put it in the C tier. I'll put it above the greed because I think it is a more generally applicable gun, like just better in more situations. So yeah, we'll give it the edge there. Okay, next up we have the Herald, which everybody probably knows about. This is definitely S tier, top of it. Probably will stay at the top of it. Everybody knows about the Herald. This gun is just stupidly strong. The damage is insane. It gets grenade damage bonuses, respectable fire rate, respectable mag size, reload speed isn't too bad, and of course the damage is just completely off the charts and it's really good on any character. Um, yeah, this gun is just silly. It's very good. Not much to be said other than that. Next up, we have the Hornet, another personal favorite. Always corrosive, fires a 6-round burst when zoomed in, reduced accuracy, increased elemental effect chance, and shots have an elemental splash effect, which is 80% grenade splash damage. This gun is really, really good with Axton and Krieg because of that. However, it's not specifically good on just those two. It's really good on pretty much every character. I really like it on Maya as well. It can put out some good elemental damage. Gage is another good one because of her elemental capacity. Not going to be as good on like Salvador because like you're not ADSing a lot, and that's a big part of doll weapons. So doll weapons in general kind of suck on Sal. Like not all of them, of course, but a good bit. But it is pretty good on Zero too. He can do quite well with pistols. Um, I think this is top of A tier because it's extremely versatile while also being insanely strong on two characters in particular. It's really good on like every character, but insanely strong on Axton and Krieg. I don't I don't know. This one could get boosted to S tier. I mean, I think if we're talking pistols, the Hornet is like I'm looking at the rest of this list and there's not much that competes with it to be honest. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we have to take the relative strength of the other stuff in the list into account, and I think that will put the Hornet S tier for me. Frankly, I would prefer it over the Grog, so I'll do that myself. There's a little bit of bias there. I'm only putting the Grog in the S tier in the first place because of its utility. I don't like the weapon. I think it's cheesy, but I can't deny how useful it is, so I'll keep it in the S tier. But maybe take my Hornet rating with a grain of salt. This is just like a personal love of mine. You can definitely make an argument for A or B tier. Anyway, moving on, we have the Infection. This gun is basically best served for elemental builds. It has good synergy with some lifesteal skills. It just like it doesn't do a lot of base damage at all, but it has insane elemental damage and elemental effect chance. Can put out some serious DOT. Um, it's good with, again, it is good with like lifesteal, and if you're switching to a Moxie weapon, good with life tap, elemental empathy, can be quite good on Gage, or I mean, Krieg for building up Bloodlust with the DOT, and of course keeping him healthy with elemental empathy. Can also be okay with a Gage elemental focus build. The damage over time is pretty substantial. Have some nice synergy with certain elemental builds, but it's not that great though, even with that in mind. The damage over time it just takes a really long time to kill enemies, especially on the OP10. It's a bit of a slow burn. It's more of like a survivability weapon with some interesting utility. Not bad. I think it's gonna be, I think C tier. I don't think it has like a special niche like the Gunnerang, and I definitely don't think it's better than the Gub. Um, I think it would outclass the Gwen's Head, though. Gwen's Head falls off later in the game. Infection can actually do something on OP10. It's just, again, a bit of a slow burn, like not going to be all that insane. Okay. All right, now we have the Infinity. This one's kind of controversial, and I'm interested to see how people react to this one. Um, I think people have polarizing views on the Infinity. Some people think it's amazing, and other people think it's complete trash. I'm actually kind of in the middle. It is not even close to a top tier gun, but it's not like trash either. Um, I think it profiles pretty similarly to the Anarchist, but the obvious advantage that the Infinity has is no reloading and good fire rate, of course, with that, but never you have to reload. Um, Infinity is pretty good, I think, almost not exclusively, but close to exclusively with like a Zero pistol build. Zero can actually make the Infinity pretty usable. A lot of other characters can't really do a whole lot with the Infinity. I think people fall into a trap with the Infinity and like, oh, I never have to reload. Like the TPS is great because of that. No, not really. Um, I think it's actually probably best used on Zero, but even then, it's like pretty outclassed by. I would easily take like an Anarchist or Fibber over the Infinity, so I definitely cannot justify it in that tier. But it does profile similarly to the Anarchist. I'm gonna put it bottom of B tier. I think it's like usable. Like I would definitely take it over the Gwen's Head and the Greed and the Infection, but it's not like anything special, really. It's okay, and it is actually pretty good on Zero, like legitimately good. But on every other character, it's just like, it's not that impressive. It's just kind of middle of the pack, and that's why I've put it there. Okay, so next we have the Judge. Bonus crit damage, 30% additive crit, 25% multiplicative, increased projectile velocity. Pretty solid in the early game since it's easy to obtain and has pretty good damage. In game though, the weapon is pretty severely outclassed by like literally like a purple Jacobs pistol would out DPS this thing most of the time, unless maybe if you're playing Zero with all the crit bonuses, it would out DPS a purple one. Um, it's not awful, but it kind of flounders relative to the rest of the list. Um, I think, hmm, honestly, I think I'd probably take the Greed over it. Um, I don't know. They're honestly pretty similar to me. They're both like okay weapons that kind of fall off later in the game. They'll perform decently, but really won't blow you away. And that's kind of how I feel about them. Okay, the Ladyfist, another kind of weird one that's hard to assess because of its odd mechanics. The Ladyfist has 800% critical hit damage, reduced bullet damage because of that, like base damage, increased accuracy and mag size. I think most of us, most BL2 players in general, are aware of the abusive techniques that you can use with the Ladyfist at this point, with the menu swapping techniques, which allows you to just demolish raid bosses. And of course, it's absolutely broken on Salvador in the offhand. Um, but even taking away its busted mechanics, it's actually still pretty good, even if you're not like abusing game mechanics. The crit damage is just insane. It's really good on Zero, and it's honestly pretty good on any character. Like if you have good aim and you can take advantage of that crit damage, it's gonna put out nice damage. It's very solid, and it also gets a boost against enemies like constructors, for example, where the crit damage from the Lady Fist will just shred them. Um, so yeah, I think this one's a pretty pretty easy A or S tier. If we're taking into account the potential to abuse its mechanics, it's easily S tier. Um, but even as a standalone gun, it's still quite strong. So I think I will actually put it in S tier. This is a really good gun, and the fact that you can use it to raid and do some pretty interesting stuff with it just makes it really, really strong. Um, if we're taking away the uh, raid abuse and all that kind of shit with menu swapping, I think it'd still be A or B tier. But you do have to factor in the ability for it to raid, and even though it is abusing game mechanics, a lot of people do it, and it's not that hard to do. Even though I don't, I still want to I factor that into my rankings. Okay, next we have the Law. 100% melee damage bonus, fixed melee accessory. The Order Shield is equipped. Melee attacks with the Law will restore the character's health at a rate of 25% of the damage dealt. Has 100% accuracy when zoomed in, plus 100%, I should say. Law has an obvious combo with Order, be a nice early to mid-game melee build option. But the weapon itself is not amazing. It falls off a good bit later in the game. The damage is actually still at least respectable. It's not like complete shit, as in just a normal weapon. I am probably just going to throw it in the same tier as the Greed and the Judge over here. Honestly, I wouldn't put a lot of um, too much stock into how I rank these three because I believe they're pretty close to interchangeable. They're all like decent DPS Jacobs weapons that have a weird niche. Okay. Alright, next up we have the little Eevee, which is always shock. Increased damage, mag size, and elemental chance on this weapon. The projectiles fire in a parabolic arc. Killing an enemy increases the action skill cooldown rate by 12%. It's far from the most potent pistol in terms of damage, but it can at least be serviceable. Um, so the damage is alright, but it's also really useful for builds revolving around action skill spam. It has a niche with that and can provide to be a useful tool in your arsenal to have around if you just want to get that action skill recharged. It's never really going to be a gun you want to run around with primarily to use as a DPS tool, but it has some nice utility with the action skill cooldown reduction. And the damage is at least like semi-respectable. So I think with that in mind, it's a usable gun, and I do like that it has this little niche with the action skill. I think high C is pretty fair. I mean, it's again kind of in this. You're noticing a trend here, or I am at least with the C tier. Like we have a lot of guns that are just they're okay. Like their damage isn't gonna blow you away, um, but they're at least serviceable. And I think little Eevee's in that category where it's at least serviceable, but it also has a nice niche that it provides. So honestly, now that I say that, I think it should be a bit higher because it's serviceable and it provides something interesting. So maybe actually bottom of the B tier. I think that's pretty fair. Maybe a little bullish, but that's okay. Alright, next up, Logan's gun. Always incendiary, rounds explode once on contact, then continue traveling if they have not struck an inert surface, or struck. Once they strike an inert surface, there is a small delay followed by a small second explosion. Rounds qualify as rockets for the purpose of shield absorption. This gun is almost exclusively used for the mechanic of use with absorbed shields to get rocket ammo. As many people probably know, it's just used for like Norfleet abuse to recharge the ammo by shooting your feet with the sham, with the Logan's gun. Honestly, outside of that, this weapon is complete dog shit. It's really bad as a standalone gun. And I don't think the utility makes up for it enough for me to really want to put it high. It's just one weird niche that allows you to restore ammo. Uh, I'll put it at the top of D tier because I'm trying to factor in the utility. Like if we were rating this gun purely off of performance as a gun, it would be F easily. But it does have that niche. It's really difficult to rate guns like this. Like obviously if you're rating it off its ability to give you Norfleet ammo, it's S tier. I mean it has a super cool niche that people tend to abuse, but I don't think that niche is enough for me to really put it high because of just how bad the weapon is alone. Anyway, next up we have the Maggie. Fires 6 projectiles per shot, decreased accuracy and damage per projectile. But again, you're firing 6 projectiles per shot, and it functions more like a shotgun with that tight 6 projectile spread. This thing can absolutely shit out damage with an accurate user, especially if you can mitigate that recoil with maybe like a Jacob's recoil allegiance relic, like cut it down a little bit, maybe some skills. It's a really fun weapon to use, and it feels fun to use. Like it just feels right. Like it feels good to mess around with and play around with. But like I guess what I'm trying to say is it feels rewarding. Like it actually requires some high skill to aim with this weapon and get consistent crits. It feels nice. But on top of that, it's also really deadly. So if you're accurate, like this thing will seriously, seriously put out some hurt. I think this is S tier for me. Um, I'll put it below the Ladyfist because the Ladyfist has the special niches with raid bosses and the insane crit damage, which allows it to do some pretty crazy stuff. But the Maggie's really fun, and I think it's a better general mobbing weapon than the Ladyfist. It's a really cool weapon, and it's really good. Deserves some more love. I really like that weapon. Okay, next we have the Pocket Rocket. Increased damage, projectile velocity, mag size, and explosion radius. Very fast projectile, which helps it from range and gives it a niche over other Torgue pistols. It's a decent gun, but it kind of suffers from being in the same category of the Herald. It's kind of unfortunate that the Herald exists for these other explosive Torgue pistols because they're just so inferior compared to it. And honestly, that alone is going to knock it down a pretty good chunk to me. I think we'll put it at the bottom of C tier. It is, yet again, like a serviceable pistol. It is usable. But when we're considering the alternative of the Herald, it really doesn't stand a chance. But it can at least perform okay on its own. Next up, we have the Rex. Increased damage plus 40% critical hit damage. Very low fire rate though, especially considering it's a Jacob's pistol. The damage is respectable, but the fire rate is so bad that is pretty much unsalvageable. Even on Zero, a character that is known for his ability to buff pistols and their fire rate. Even on him, it's terrible. If a pistol is bad on Zero, it's typically a very, very bad pistol. I think that's a good benchmark. Zero, in my opinion, is actually the best pistol user. I think Salvador is obviously up there too, but it's kind of a different style. Zero is more of a generalist pistol user. He can bring out the best in pretty much all of them, other than explosive ones. But whereas Salvador is more like the Herald Ladyfist user. Definitely not a Jacobs one. So anyway, this is easily F tier. I think it actually might be worse than the Dominator. Like, I cannot overstate like just how bad the fire rate on this thing is. It's horrendous. Anyway, moving on, we have the Ruby. Um, this is a weapon that was pretty much like all the rage before the Croc Nozzle was released for its ability to provide a very large heal, being a Moxie weapon. It's still a decent health gating option if you can't get the Grog for some reason. Um, it would get more points in my book if it was at least a solid DPS option. It's not, and again, it's just like it's suffering from the same thing as these other like the pocket rocket. There's a pistol that fulfills the same niche that the Ruby does, but like 10 times better. So just by default, it drops a lot in the rankings because there's no reason to really use this. And on its own, it's pretty mediocre. I guess I'm debating between C or D. I mean, this thing is a pretty bad pistol, and all it's good for is the Moxie heal, but it's severely outclassed by its counterpart, the Grog. So I think I'll put it right next to the Logan's gun. I think I would honestly have the Ruby over the Logan's gun because I don't really abuse the spam Norfleet thing, and um, at least it can provide some utility in the early to mid game, and it can still give you a good health gating option in the late game if you don't want to abuse the Grog. So it does have some utility. Maybe I'm being too harsh on it, but again, the Ruby is just hurt by the Grog. If the Grog didn't exist, the Ruby would probably be A or S tier. I mean, because it would be the best healing option. So take it for what it's worth. All right, next we have the Stalker. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So the Stalker fires bullets that ricochets multiple times, increased damage, fire rate, and mag size, reduced accuracy, and bullet speed. So this gun needs help from characters that can boost projectile speed. Maya and Zero are great examples, and they can get a lot out of this weapon. It's quite potent in their hands. Gauge is also solid with this weapon because of the ricocheting bullets. And it's still pretty decent on other characters, even with the slow projectile speed. But that's over half the cast. I mean, Maya, Zero, and Gauge are all good with this weapon. And the other three members of the Vault Hunter list are still pretty good with it, but they're not going to be able to maximize its potential like those three. But the Stalker and Anarchist, to me, I think Stalker, Anarchist, and the Stinger, which I'm about to cover, are all three like completely interchangeable. Spoiler alert. These don't really matter to me. I guess I would put the Stinger over the Anarchist, but that's about it. Like they're all very similar and fulfill a similar purpose. Um, the Stinger is literally the same thing as an Anarchist, except it has ricocheting bullets. So I think by default it's better than the Anarchist because, okay, it does all the things that the Anarchist does, but it also ricochets. Cool. So we'll give the Stinger the edge there. The Stalker I'll put below the Anarchist because it doesn't have as much generalist capabilities. The slow-moving projectiles hinders it on other characters, but the DPS and the ricocheting bullets still make it a great option, but it's more of a close quarters option compared to the Anarchist and Stinger. Anyway, honestly, they're all pretty much right there. I think they're way too similar to really push apart. Next up, we have the Teapot. Always corrosive, increased accuracy, elemental damage, and elemental splash effect. Excuse me, reduced damage, fire rate, mag size, and elemental chance. The unique splash and contagious corrosion damage that scales up with grenade damage make the weapon more like almost like a DOT grenade launcher than a pistol. Um, it's really good against crowds for that reason. The 80% grenade splash damage is parallel to the Hornet. It's a pretty underrated weapon that's actually pretty nice with DOT builds and is pretty effective in clearing out crowds of armored enemies. Holy shit, I can't speak. But this weapon's actually pretty good. It's definitely not better than the Hornet. DPS just doesn't rival it. The damage over time is probably going to be slightly better than the Hornet on this one, so it's a bit more of a slow burner. But it's a pretty solid weapon, and the grenade damage is really nice with Accent and Krieg, for example. They'll be able to boost this one up a nice bit. I will put this one right above the Gutterang. I think it belongs in that high B tier. It's a pretty good mobbing weapon. It has some nice niches with the elemental damage and grenade damage. I think that makes it a nice choice. It's definitely above average. It's not just like meh, serviceable. Like, no, it's actually pretty good. Next, we have the Thunderball Fist. Always shock. The shots fired produce electrical orbs, which upon impact deal splash damage before flaring upwards for a short distance and detonating a second time with electric damage. 100% grenade splash damage and 150% launcher splash on the orb, which isn't boosted by grenade launcher or explosive damage, but launcher splash can proc bloodbath though, and it gets boosted from immolate Maya skill. So it does have some extra little niche abilities there. I think this weapon's really fun. It's really good with elemental builds. The splash damage is super nice on characters like Accent and Krieg, as mentioned previously. It's also really good on a gauge shock build. It's a really, really good mobbing weapon. It sucks ass against raids and like super tanky bosses and stuff. But as a mobbing weapon, which is generally what I'm basing these lists off, it's really good. And I think the grenade damage gives it a nice extra niche with characters like Accent and Krieg to make it more viable on them. But I think this weapon really shines on like a gauge or Maya elemental build, and it's going to put out some good damage for you. I will put this. This one's tough. I don't know if I want to put it above the Anarchist groups. I think it's right in this territory though. Man, this is tough. It's a high A tier. I think we'll definitely put it above the Fibber, but I think the Stalker, Stinger, Anarchist group are potentially a little bit more versatile and a little bit more consistent DPS output, and they're not locked to the shock element. So we'll give them the edge. Next, we have the Tinderbox, always incendiary, reduced bullet damage and rate of fire. Additional 100% grenade splash. Doesn't help it at all, spoiler alert. Increased elemental effect chance. The projectiles fly in a low parabolic arc, which make it extremely hard to hit enemies, very hard to aim and use. This weapon is so hard to use effectively, and even when you do, the DPS sucks. This is an F tier weapon, no question. Probably better than the rest in the F tier, though. These are two really bad weapons down there with it. But it's not good. Would not recommend. Okay, next we have the Unforgiven. Increased damage and accuracy. Another reduced fire rate on a Jacob's pistol. Increased recoil and accuracy recovery duration. 100% crit bonus that is additive on top of the standard Jacob's 25% multiplicative crit. It is basically a less shit version of the Rex, but the Rex is horrible, so that's not saying much. Apparently they just wanted another version of the Rex. I don't know why, but it suffers from the same fire rate problems like the Rex. It can at least put out more DPS because it's not as damning as the Rex's fire rate, but the damage or the fire rate would need to be a pretty significant amount higher for this weapon to salvage itself. This weapon's actually a lot better in the UCP, and I love using it, but in the vanilla game, this is a pretty fucking shit weapon. I'm going to have to go with D. I'll put it right above the Logan's gun and Devastator. I would honestly prefer the niche use of the Ruby's healing than the Unforgiven, which is sad considering it's a pearlescent. I honestly think everything in the C tier has a general more viability than the Unforgiven, which is just pretty pathetic. Next, we have the Veritas. 10% duration to fight for your life for every Veritas or Aquitus equipped in the party. 10% multiplicative crit bonus. This gun is basically a standard blue pistol with some cheeky effects when you play with your friends. And those cheeky effects really don't make a big difference because you're all using the Veritas and Aquitus, or whatever the fuck it's called, which isn't very good. If you're all using that, you and your friends are probably all dying. So yeah, not impressive. It's a pretty decent early to mid game pistol, but this thing is kind of crap like later in the game. Um, it's I think it's D tier. I'll put it right below the Logan's gun because at least the Logan's gun has a niche, whereas this thing is just kind of meh. It's not really even serviceable compared to the things in the C tier. I would easily take those in the C tier above it. Okay, last but certainly least, we have the Wunderlust, which is easily going to be F tier. Extremely low initial accuracy, the fire projectiles home onto enemies and explodes while bouncing off solid surfaces, increase elemental effect chance, reduce damage. It's a dart pistol, terrible, as I mentioned before, but it has even less damage than a dart pistol. Doesn't benefit from grenade damage. The whole gimmick of this gun is that it seeks out enemies for you, but the gun's damage is so unbelievably bad that it does not matter. I mean, enemies will literally out heal the damage of this gun on OP10. Like, it's that bad. This gun is completely unusable without gauge. I mean, even with gauge, it's still awful. I mean, you're talking about 500 to 600 anarchy for this gun to actually even start doing something, which is completely absurd. Any gun is good with 500 to 600 anarchy, so I don't think that's a good enough excuse to bump it. Um, it's bad. Um, I guess I'll put it at the top of S tier because you can do a nice little gimmicky build with 600 anarchy with Wunderlust, but it is just so bad. Yeah, not gonna recommend the Wunderlust. But anyway, that's pretty much it for this one, guys. Hope you enjoyed, and definitely let me know if you have any criticism or any changes you would make to the tier list. And yeah, I will see you guys next time.